Hello and welcome back to Reddit Revenge. When you buy a house that sat empty for years, you don't just inherit walls and pipes, you inherit habits. Mine was a half-renovated bargain in the capital, scooped from family friends who'd left the country and needed cash fast. The main door still had a padlock where a lock should be. The gate was non-existent, and the dust had learned my name by the second hour. Day one, I rolled up with boxes and 3 dogs, and found a stranger's motorbike asleep in my garage like it paid rent. I pushed it to the curb, called a welder, and by sunset a rail gate clanged shut for the first time in 3 years. 15 minutes later, an angry fist drummed my metal, demanding the bike. I watched through a slit in the curtain, said nothing, and let silence do the heavy lifting. He left. I told myself the message was clear: new owner, new rules. But abandoned places breed entitlement like standing water breeds mosquitoes, and the neighborhood had spent 3 comfortable years treating my property as public. The bike was just the first ripple. The real parasite was invisible, pressurized, opportunistic, and living in the pipes between our walls. I didn't know it yet, but my quiet house had been feeding someone else's thirst. And the bill, though cheap, wasn't the part that would make my blood boil. Not by a long shot. The first clue arrived in the shower. I twisted the tap and felt the stream thin to a tired drizzle. In our city, roof tanks are the rule, pumps are the heartbeat, and low pressure can mean anything from municipal hiccups to a neighbor filling a pool. Then, under the hiss of water, I heard it. A mechanical hum from next door, steady as a generator. My neighbor, an old man on the ground floor with 2 stories rented above, was running his pump. 10 minutes later, his hum cut off. My pressure surged back like the house exhaled. Coincidence? I tested it again that evening. Waited for the hum, opened a different tap, watched the flow droop. Hum stops, pressure returns. Lather, rinse, repeat. The former owners had warned me. He'd been furious at the sale. He liked the abandoned house beside him. Liked parking where he pleased. Liked walking through an open lot to fix his own wiring. Liked pretending a property line was a suggestion. He'd even advised them not to sell to outsiders. I'm 6 feet, broad-shouldered, 3 dogs deep. He glared when I jogged past. I waved back with teeth. Still, I tried to be a good neighbor. But good neighbors don't siphon. And my water bills from the empty years, curious little spikes, suddenly had a soundtrack. If he tapped a forgotten branch line while this place sat unguarded, it wouldn't show in a glance. It would show in a pattern. And the pattern was humming through my tiles. I spent 2 days learning my house like a detective learns a suspect. I traced pipes, mapped valves, bled air, listened with my ear pressed to plaster like the wall might confess. The renovations were mid-story. Half modern, half 1990s, with mystery tees that went nowhere and a dead-end spur that kicked like a vein. I couldn't find the siphon point, but every time his pump spun up, my pressure sagged as if my line sprouted a straw next door. In my country, water is cheap. $5 a month will wash 3 dogs, a car, and a conscience. This wasn't about money. It was the principle of a man who thought abandoned meant annexed, who decided that my bill could be his budget line. Confrontation crossed my mind. Knock on his door, speak plain, hope for shame. Then I pictured the script: denials, bluster, a claim that everyone does it, maybe even threats about connections, legal route, possible but slow. Meanwhile, every shower would feel like a tax. And there was something else. In our tenant-protective city, landlords must supply water and power. If this guy had built his rentals on a theft and on wiring older than my first phone, he hadn't just cut corners. He'd set a trap for himself. All I had to do was stop feeding it. A plan formed with the elegance of a valve turning. I wouldn't touch his property. I wouldn't touch his pump. I would close my own mains and let physics ask the questions I didn't have to. Monday night, I waited for the hum. At 10:42 p.m., it spun up, a hollow drum throbbing through cement. Somewhere above his ceiling, a ball valve in a roof tank had dropped and called for water. His pump answered greedily. I stepped outside, crossed to my street-side cabinet, and turned my supply clockwise until the handle kissed metal. Then I waited. Here's how it works. The float in his tank stays low until water rises. No water, no rise. No rise? The signal keeps the pump on, chewing electricity and cavitating its own throat. A healthy system trips a protection relay. A 1990s system trips nothing. At midnight, the hum was still grinding. At 1:30, it was thinner, a sick insect. Somewhere in that old man's walls, wire warmed like a fever. At 3:03 a.m., the city's quiet broke. Hushed voices in his stairwell turned sharp, angry. Tenants, no water since midnight. Another voice, why is the power out on all floors? Feet, doors, the slap of sandals on tile. Our tenant laws are gospel here. Water and power are essentials. Cut them by neglect or design and you pay. I sat on my step with my dogs pressed to my shins, listening to a house realize it had eaten its own fuse. I hadn't so much as hopped a fence. I'd simply stopped subsidizing his theft, and physics, impartial, unsentimental, had done the rest. Dawn would bring uniforms, and paperwork, and fines. Sunrise painted the street while his tenants filed complaints. One had already packed a bag. The other called the police from the curb. The first officer arrived with a pen and a face that said he'd seen this movie. In our city, enforcement doesn't always wait for a judge. If you're clearly in breach, unsafe wiring, essential services interrupted, fines arrive first, appeals later. The old man tried indignation. The tenants tried the law. The law won. By lunchtime, he was holding a notice for a $500 penalty, a week's wage times many in our neighborhood, and an order to refund both security deposits. Worse, he couldn't rent again until a licensed electrician rebuilt his dinosaur wiring and a plumber certified the supply. Overnight, his steady income evaporated. Pride disguised as thrift had burned his pump. Thrift disguised as pride had roasted his fuse box. He limped up the stairs like a man climbing a debt. Would I have felt bad if he'd stolen from a utility? Maybe. But he'd used my private line like a piggyback charger at a cafe. He'd been warned by reality and ignored it. Now reality had sent him a bill. I spent the afternoon with my own plumber, sealing a suspicious spur and installing a proper gate valve inside my fence line. The work was clean, the receipt neat. Across the wall, a house sulked in the heat, quiet for the first time since I moved in. Physics had paused. Consequences kept ticking. By midweek, one tenant was gone and the other had a truck. Plastic chairs, a mattress, a blender with a cracked handle. Life poured down those stairs and into the street while the old man hovered with wringing hands. Word traveled faster than a leak. Shopkeepers clucked tongues. A tea-stall uncle muttered that the landlord liked shortcuts. A woman from 2 doors down whispered that he'd bragged of cutting costs for years. Now the neighborhood performed its favorite ritual. Post-mortem advice delivered too late. Should have upgraded, uncle. Call a real electrician. Water is cheap. Why steal? He avoided my eyes when I stepped out with my dogs, the 3 of them trotting like small judges. I wasn't crowing. I watered my bougainvillea and watched the hose arc with honest pressure. A small, domestic joy that felt like order returning. That evening, I ran a test. Opened my mains, turned on a tap, listened for the hum. Nothing. He'd killed the pump or it had killed itself. I slept with the kind of sleep you get after finally scratching a stubborn itch. In the morning, I bought a no parking stencil and fresh paint for the gate. The letters dried crisp and white, loud in a way that didn't need yelling. Somewhere beyond our street, my former water bill, those strange spikes during the empty years, felt like a solved riddle. Entitlement is loud when unchallenged. Silence is what it sounds like when it runs out of excuses. 2 days later, he appeared at my gate like a man practicing normal. He smoothed his shirt and tried for neighborly. Did you, turn off your water the other night? His eyes flicked to my cabinet, then back. The performance wanted me to grant him a plausible story he could live with. I obliged pleasantly. Yeah, I said. We found a tiny leak. Shut everything overnight. Plumber fixed it next morning. All good now. I left the lie sitting there like a folded napkin. He nodded, lips a tight line. Oh, okay. He didn't accuse. He didn't apologize. He turned and walked back into his dark stairwell, carrying the knowledge like an egg he was afraid to drop. He knew I knew. He knew I could prove nothing without proving him. And he knew that any path he chose now led through fines he couldn't pay and repairs he couldn't afford. Pride makes a poor landlord. Shame makes a worse one. He began spending nights at his daughter's place across town. By week's end, he moved a suitcase, then a second. Tenants gone. Income gone. The pump silent, the meter still. I stood on my step at dusk, listening to the city. Vendors calling, scooters whining, a distant muezzin, and felt my house finally belonged to me, acoustically and legally. Justice hadn't knocked loudly. It had turned a handle and walked in. I hired a pro to finish what abandonment had started. We removed every legacy pipe that crossed a boundary, capped hidden T's, and replaced the street-side valve with a lockable box that clicked like a seatbelt. Inside, we added a pressure regulator, a clean-out, and a neat label for every line the renovators had left half-explained. "Neighbor trouble?" the plumber asked without looking up. I smiled. "Former trouble." He nodded, the shrug of a man who sees patterns for a living. We tested the system. Tanks filled, floats popped, pumps kicked on and off with the precision of a metronome. My shower roared like a small waterfall. The garden hose hissed happily. Small order, big relief. Across the wall, the old man's balcony hung laundry like surrender flags. Without tenants, the top floors dimmed. Without income, paint would peel, cracks would widen, and time would do what time does to stubbornness. I don't celebrate a person's ruin. I celebrate boundaries, literal and moral, reasserting themselves after being ignored. He could have asked the former owners for a meter. He could have paid the city $5. He chose free. Free is expensive when it's stolen. That night, I slept with my window open and listened to my tank refill. A soft thunk when the float closed. It sounded like a period at the end of a sentence that had rambled for 3 years too long. People love lessons packaged in tidy morals, but real street justice is messier. A chain of small decisions, each one avoidable, stacking until gravity takes over. He stole. He neglected. He ignored. I installed a gate. I turned a valve. The rest was wires, laws, and tenants who know their rights. In the weeks that followed, the street adjusted. Delivery bikes stopped using my driveway as a turn. The stencil on my gate earned respect. Neighbors waved differently, less like I was the new occupant of an old problem, more like I was the solution who moved in. Once, at the tea stall, a man asked if I'd done something to the landlord's pump. I sipped and said, "I fixed my own plumbing." It wasn't coy. It was the truth, refined to its essential shape. Revenge doesn't need to be theatrical to be satisfying. It needs to be proportionate, legal, and, if possible, self-executing. Turning off my mains violated nothing. Maintaining my property offended no one but the person profiting from its neglect. His fines, his lost deposits, his move to his daughter's spare room, those were authored by the same pen that drew from my meter without permission. The city stamped the ending. I just stopped writing his water bill. And every morning when the dogs lap bowls I filled, and the bougainvillea drinks deep, I remember. Peace isn't free. It's paid for in boundaries kept. In the end, I didn't need a shouting match, the police on speed dial, or a courtroom. I needed a wrench, a plan, and the patience to let physics and policy finish the argument. He learned that stealing cheap water can cost you tenants, fines, and independence. I learned that the quietest lever in any dispute is the one attached to your own property. One turn, and the house that felt borrowed finally felt like mine. That's closure, steady pressure, a locked valve, and a front gate that means what it says. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted him outright, gone legal from day one, or let the pump teach the lesson? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading. If you enjoyed this story, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. And share this video with someone who loves a good revenge story. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp.